When you work in Google Sheets, you may find from time to time that you would like to highlight certain cells that have specific criteria that you want to point out, and it probably won't be a whole row or a whole column or certainly not the whole spreadsheet. Well, how can you do that? Well, conditional formatting may be your answer. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's look at conditional formatting in Google Sheets. As we look at our example today, starting in A1, we can see that it has first name and last name. So this is a list of probably students within a class. And then to the right of that, starting in column C, we have some months, February, March, April, May, and we have numbers in those columns. So those must be either an average for that month, or it might even be that there's just one score per month. But whatever it is, we have numbers for each one of the months. And then in column G, we have the final project received date. Now, that seems to imply that, yes, there was a final project and it was required at a certain date, but it seems to suggest that there might even be some points deducted if the projects are turned in late. To the right of that, we have the final project score, and then we have a final average. Now, as I click in I2 and look at that formula, we can see that what happened was the scores for February through May, or this is C2 through F2 in this case, are averaged together, and then the final score is added in. So what we are really doing is saying all of the work during the class time, those 4 months, is averaged, and then the final score counts as half of the final average. That's why we're dividing by 2 here. So here are the final scores. And as you can see, while no one has below a 70, there are very few people who have above a 90, and it's kind of barely above a 90. So we might look at conditional formatting as a way to visually figure out why the scores are a little bit lower than anticipated. To add in conditional formatting, we are going to want to go to the menu bar to the 5th choice here, which is Format. And then we'll come almost all the way down to the bottom to Conditional Formatting and click on that. Now, conditional formatting choices show up on the right, and starting at the top of this pane, we can see that we could add in a single color or a color scale. And because I have clicked in I2, it's even saying, well, do you want to use I2 as what you're going to add conditional formatting? And right now that's fine, but we're going to change that very quickly. And then below that we have the format rules, and we're going to look at each one of those. Now below that we even have a formatting style, and you can see that the default is this kind of light green, but that we can add in some changes, some formatting to the text and how it looks as well. And then when we've finished with that conditional formatting rule, we can say that we are done in the lower right. Well, let's first of all go to this apply to range, and I'm just going to delete I2, and instead I'm going to select C2 through F13, and notice that I have a little pop-up box that says okay, C2 through F13, and I could even add another range. Oh, let's do that. So let's click and add another range, which is H2 through H13, the final scores, or at least the final project scores. And then we'll click OK. And then we need to have some sort of rule that we want to apply for our conditional formatting. And right now it has defaulted to is not empty. And occasionally when you have a spreadsheet, you want to find things that aren't empty. So that would be very helpful, but not exactly what we need right now. Notice as I clicked on that drop down, that we have all sorts of choices here. So is empty is another choice, and I would suggest you probably look for empty cells more than you look for cells that aren't empty, but that is also a possibility. But then as I scroll down here, besides empty or not empty cells, we have several choices for text, and then below that we have choices for date. And finally, at the bottom, we have some numeric comparisons. So first of all, we might want to look for greater than, or we might want to look for greater than or equal to. Oh, well, let's do that one, greater than or equal to. And when we select that, then another box pops up, and we need to type in a value or formula. Well, we're just going to say it's greater than or equal to 90. We want to find those large numbers. And I think we'll keep the default green there, maybe make the font bold. And then in the bottom right, click Done. And as I click off, you can see that as I was adding those rules that they popped up within our spreadsheet here. So now we can see that while the final scores are kind of low, certainly there were people who were doing really well during the regular class time, and maybe it's the final score that kind of messed them up and kept them from getting a really high score. Well, I'm going to select all of these scores again, and then we will certainly go back to Format and Conditional Formatting. And I'm going to add another rule, and it says, all right, we want to apply to this range of C2 through F13. And because I selected these cells first, it's not even giving me the option maybe to select another data range. Let's see if we can click on that little button with the 4 squares, and sure enough, now it gives me the listing of what I've selected, but it also gives me the choice to add another range, which is what we will do. And we'll come back and select H2 through H13 again and click OK. So now from here, we're going to go to the Format Rules and go down to that bottom section, because we also might want to find let's see, less than or equal to. So now let's find the lower part of the range. So let's do less than or equal to, and the value or formula, let's say 72, which is a relatively low number. Now the problem is, if I keep this as the same color, I'm not going to be able to differentiate between the high scores and the lower scores. So I'm going to click on the green here where it says default. And let's go with kind of this red background instead and click Done. And so now we can see the scores that are 72 and lower. And whoa, that's kind of interesting, because visually it looks to me like there's almost as many low scores as there are high scores. And potentially that is what's causing some of those issues that we noticed. All right, now let's select again February through May. And this is just so that we can see some of the other conditional formatting that we might want to do. Add another rule. And we'll start with C2 through F13. But again, we're going to go to the right, select the data range, and add another range, which, as I move this little dialog box over, is the scores in H. And we'll click OK. Now for our format rules, we'll click on the drop down, go to the bottom here where we're comparing numbers. And we started with 72 or lower, and we said 90 or higher. So let's see if we can find the numbers that are between, let's say 73 and 89. And again, we need to change that default color, and we'll just go to the yellow here, kind of a neutral color, and click Done. And so now we can see the high scores, the middle scores, and the low scores for our class here. Now let's remove the conditional formatting that we have added and look at some other possibilities. So to do that, we can go to Format, Conditional Formatting, and actually there's one here that says cell is not empty, and we get a little trash can, and we can remove the rule. So if I select the cells that have rules on them, notice that on the right, Conditional Format Rules, we can simply go to the trash can, remove the rule, and kind of clean up what we've done. When we looked at the conditional formatting rules that we could create, we noticed that besides empty and not empty as the first choices, then we had some possibilities for text. So before we do anything else, let's select the cells that have people's names in them. And now let's add another rule. So again, we could go with single color, and it's even picked up that we want to apply this rule to the range of A2 through B13. And we could say, of course, is not empty or is empty, but then below that, text contains. So let's do that one. And what is the value or the formula that we want to look for? Well, let's say that we are looking for everyone who has a C in their name. So we would type a C, and you can see that it's already found all of those entries. So let's go ahead and come down where it says Formatting Style, and let's click where it says Default, and let's go with a white background and green text this time instead, and we can click Done. And I'm going to need to click off of that so that you can see. It's a little hard to see, as a matter of fact. So let me go back. And where it says text contains C, let's go to the B for bold text and see if that doesn't help us see it a little bit better. And then as I come over to the right, I have a fill color. And I'm not just limited to the green and the red and the yellow that we've seen with the defaults, which are right here in this custom list within this gallery. The standard colors might be a little bright with that green, but look at all of the choices that I have that I might decide to use behind that green text. And maybe I just want to have a light green. So I can click on that and click Done. And then when I click off, now you can see those cells much easier. And all we did was find the entries that have a C in them someplace. Well, let's look at some other possibilities here for text. So I'm going to select that. And the first thing I'm going to do is simply delete our rule as it stands right now. And then we'll add another rule. So let's see, we have in the format cells if for text, we looked for C's, but let's look for text that starts with, and then again, we need to put in a value of some kind. So let's say that we need to find everyone whose name starts with an L in some way. And again, let's look at changing the default, and we'll go with, say, the red text. And we could even, again, put in some sort of an interesting background. Maybe not too interesting, but we can click Done. And now we have everyone whose name or whose text begins with an L. Well, let's go back, select all of that text, and we'll again delete what we did create, and we'll add another rule. And this time, as we look at the text, we have text is exactly. Now that's kind of interesting. Let's look at that a second. Let's say that we see someone whose name is Lacey, but we type L-A-C, and we forget to, to type in the EY. Maybe we're distracted, and we can just take the default here, but when we click done, notice that it didn't pick up anything. So exactly means exactly that. We need to add in the EY for Lacey for Sheets to find the exact entry. So it needs to be a precise match, not an approximate match. And that's good to know. Now, coming down here, we have bold, we have italics, we have underline, we have strike through. Let's do a strike through. And then for the text color, we could even add in some different text color. Maybe we should make it blue or something so it stands out. Well, it's a little obnoxious, but we'll do that. And click done. And so now we can see that maybe Adam has decided to change his last name for some reason. And so we're striking that out, and we're making sure that everyone can see that within our spreadsheet. And then, yet again, we'll go select our text and remove our rule. We can also set up some conditional formatting with dates. So let's select G2 through G13, and again add another rule. And we're still with a single color, but let's come down to the format rules and click that drop down. And now we have three choices with the dates. We can look for the date is, or it's before or after. And let's go to the date is after, and notice that we have today, and let me click the drop down, tomorrow, yesterday, so it gives you kind of a 3-day range, or the exact date. And if it's the exact date, then we need to put in a value or a formula. So let's say that the deadline for this particular project was May 3rd. I'm going to just type 5/3/2022, which I think may work for us. And anything after that date is late, so let's make it red. In fact, let's make the text bright red and bold. And let's click done. And so now we can very easily see who has turned that final project in late. And then if we've decided we're going to deduct from that final score, we can do that very easily by simply finding those particular dates. So far, we've only been looking at one solid color when we've looked at our conditional formatting, but we can add in some color gradients. So let's look at two examples for that, and we're just going to look at the score in column H and then the average in column I. So to do that, we're going to add another rule, and we're going to go with a color scale. And I'm going to just delete G15 here, and I'm going to select H2 through H13 and click OK. Now, the default is green, just like it has been, but if you look at that preview, notice that you go from a darker green to a, white, a very light green. And if we look at the preview of what's going on, it looks like 96 is the highest score here, and it is the lightest color, whereas 67 is one of the lower numbers, and it's the darkest green. that probably needs some sort of a legend if you're going to share that with other people, so that they can very easily tell what you mean by those colors and what the dark green means as opposed to a very light green. And we could even from here just say that we are finished. Notice though that it has a minimum value, so that's the default here, the dark green, a midpoint, and then a max value. So we could, as we look at these, click on min value and see that we could even change that to a number or a percent or a percentile, and that is something that you might be interested in doing as well, but let's just click on done. Now let's also then select the cells for average and add another rule. There we go. Let's add another rule, color scale. And it's already picked up that the range is column I, and we have again that green preview. But let's change the colors here. So min value, again, we can go with number, percent, or percentile. I think we'll just stay with a number. And so the lowest number there is a 73.6 that they've already found. And we can say, well, I want that to be a dark green, but I can click on the little paint pail here. And when I do that, then I have all sorts of choices. So maybe I want to make it kind of this magenta and have it maybe move into other colors, or I kind of like that purple. Let's go with purple. But that doesn't necessarily have to be just the default that we see here. So with the midpoint, again, I can say I want that to be a number, a percent, or percentile. We'll say number, and it's already picked up the midpoint of this particular scale, but instead of purple, let's make that blue. And notice how our preview has changed. And then for the maximum value, again, I can make it a number or a percent or a percentile, and the highest number here is 90.5. Well, what if I do something really interesting and make that a lime green? Now, here is our scale, and we might again want to share that in a key or a legend of some kind so that people understand what we are doing, and then we can click done in the lower right. And then click off so we can see. And maybe I don't have enough variety here within the colors, but adding a gradient can be, well, one, very colorful, but a very interesting way of pointing out how things should look. So let's even select February through May, and let's add another rule, and we want to use a color scale. And it's going to default to the greens, which is sort of attractive, but let's look at that. Let's go, instead of green this time, let's go with magenta. And notice that our minimum number is 65, that's our low point. Our midpoint is also a number of some kind, 82. Well, but let's do a blue here. And then for our maximum value, let's go with number, which somebody made 100 at some point. And let's make that kind of gold maybe. And click done. So as I look at the colors here, I can see that they are fairly bright, and because of that, it is kind of difficult to see the numbers. And if I were to print this, chances are it would be even more difficult to see the numbers that are represented in these cells. So let's go back to our color scale rule and see if we can fix this. Well, we have color scale selected, and as I scroll down, we only have the ability to change the color scale, because if I come back to single color and click. It removes our color scale, but it does give us the ability to change the text. We could make it bold, italics, underline, strike through, change the text color, or even the background color. That is not really the background that we want to change. So we have a choice of changing the text or having some really good colors. So let's go to color scale and keep that. But we're also going to keep those cells selected because after we have created the color scale that we want, we can, if we choose to, go up to the toolbar and still make our numbers bold, for example. And you can see right away that that makes quite a bit of difference in how that is going to look. So you can go in after the fact and after you've done your conditional formatting and use your toolbar to do some other kinds of changes that you may prefer to do. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, LinkedIn Learning, Learning Express Library, and Udemy Business. We also premiere 2 new videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel. From there, be sure to look for our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist, which contains all of our tech videos.